There is a face in Kathmandu that has been watching the city for longer than anyone can explain. Once a year, it comes out of hiding. Indra Jatra fills the streets. Drums, torches, chariots, masks, gods walking among men. And above the chaos, that face. Carved, fierce, enormous, staring down at the crowd like it's looking for something. They call it Akash Bhairav. Most people who see it think it's just a god. They have no idea what or who they're actually looking at. Because this story doesn't start in Kathmandu. It starts on a battlefield most of the world has heard of, in a war that decided the fate of an empire. Kurukshetra, the Mahabharata. 18 days that changed everything. And somewhere in the middle of it, one warrior never swung a single weapon. He wasn't weak. He wasn't a coward. He may have been the most dangerous fighter on either side. He carried 3 arrows, not ordinary ones. Arrows that never missed. Arrows powerful enough, some say, to end the entire war in a single afternoon.
So why didn't he fight? Before the armies had even gathered, he made a vow. He would fight for whichever side was losing. Sounds honorable. But follow it to its logical end and it becomes something else entirely. Join the weaker army and it starts winning, which makes it the stronger army, which means he'd have to switch sides and switch again and again. With 3 unmissable arrows, one man could keep both armies bleeding forever and make sure neither side actually won. The war wouldn't belong to the Pandavas. It wouldn't belong to the Kauravas. It would belong to him. Krishna saw it coming before the first arrow was ever loosed. So he went to the warrior in disguise, not as a god, but as a humble Brahmin, and asked him to prove his strength. The warrior showed him, and Krishna understood immediately this man could not be allowed anywhere near the battlefield. So he asked for something no one expects to be asked for. Not the arrows, not the vow. His head. The warrior didn't flinch. He'd made a promise, and a man who breaks his word has already lost the only thing worth keeping. He agreed. But he asked for one thing in return. If he couldn't fight in the greatest war of the age, he wanted to watch it. Every clash, every fall, until the very last breath of the very last day. Krishna granted it. And the warrior's head was placed on a hilltop, overlooking Kurukshetra, eyes open, facing the war he would never join. For 18 days it watched. It watched Bhishma fall. It watched Abhimanyu fall. It watched Karna fall. Thousands of soldiers who had marched to Kurukshetra convinced they controlled their own fate, and one severed head on a hill, watching a truth none of them could see. That the battle below was never really being decided by the men fighting it at all. When the 18th day ended, the war was over. But the head remained. And here is where the story leaves Kurukshetra completely. Because in the plains of India, this warrior was written into the epic as Barbarik, a name in one chapter of a very long book. But in the mountains, far to the north, he already had another name. An older one that belonged to him before he ever gave up his head. Yalambar, the first king of the Kirats, a ruler of the Himalayas, remembered in his own homeland not as a footnote in someone else's war, but as the beginning of a dynasty. The warrior on the hill and the king of the mountains were the same person. His body never came home, but his story did. And in the valley he once ruled, that story didn't fade. It transformed. The head that watched the fall of an empire became sacred. The king who gave everything for a promise became legend. And centuries later, that same face, the one that watched Kurukshetra, began to watch over Kathmandu instead. Akash Bhairav. Which brings us back to where we started. Indra Jatra. The drums, the torches, the crowds filling the same streets they filled for generations. And above them, that enormous face, still staring down the way it has for 1,000 years. Now you know what it actually is. Not just a god, a king, a witness, a warrior who never raised a weapon and still saw more of that war than anyone who did. Yalambar gave his head so he could watch history unfold. And every year during Indra Jatra, Kathmandu gives him something back. It looks up and it remembers him.
Thank you for joining us on this journey. Subscribe to explore more forgotten history.